I want to, last week, we talked about, Revelations, 13th chapter, and I think that's what it was, wasn't it? In verses, 1 and 11, right?
Yeah.
I want to focus on verse 12 for a few moments, if I may, unless there are questions from last week. Verse 12 says, of the second beast, the beast of the earth, and he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and caused the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Before I discuss it, please let me reiterate something. When it makes reference to the beast, it uses personal pronouns, he, him, and they should not be there. It should be it. And the reason it should be it is because it's not a person, neither is it an animal, it's a concept. So it should be it. When I reference those, the reason I want to look at this 12th verse is because it is happening right before our eyes. You remember we talked about Revelation is now, and when it talks about having it exercising the power that it received from the first beast is mentioned in the first verse of the 13th chapter. That beast being that of religion. And last week, during the this week, during the Kavanaugh discussion, there was this church in Spartanburg County, Mountain View, publicly endorsed Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court. The reason the church was able to do that publicly is because there has been an executive order issued that churches can participate in politics with impunity. Now, that doesn't mean the law, as far as the Internal Revenue Service, has changed. It simply means that the president has granted them permission to do it without intervention from the Internal Revenue Service. Because based upon the Internal Revenue Service, the laws governing charitable organizations, 501c3s, you cannot participate in politics by virtue of endorsing a candidate or a policy or an action. But that has been circumvented by this executive order. I tell you all that so you understand the foundation, so you understand what I'm about to say. By virtue of doing that, the church gave the politicians not only the cover, but the power to endorse an accused sexual pervert or assaulter. It received its power from the church. You say, well, it was only one church, Mountain View. Please understand something. That's not an independent church in that it belongs to a denomination. And denominational pastors do not make individual decisions. He got the go-ahead from somebody. He discussed it with some other pastors, if not with the local association or the state convention, but he did discuss it, I guarantee you, with someone. So that in itself is the church granting the power to the state to do its biddings. Now,
Granting the power to who?
to the state, the church granting power to the state to do its biddings. And the biddings that it is looking for has nothing to do with giving tax cuts to the wealthy. They don't care about that. But it has everything to do with the church being in control of the government. And the key, the point, the one thing that they want is Roe versus Wade to be gutted. They're not going to repeal it. I'll explain that in a moment. Then they also want to be able to openly contribute to political candidates and to actually campaign for them from their pulpits.
They do it anyway.
They don't do it as overtly as they want to do it. They want to be able to do it overtly.
I think I'm on TV into it.
The way they do it in the churches is say that anyone who supports abortion is against the laws of God. Now they can simply say,
Vote for so.
yeah, a name, vote for so and so, vote for Trump, that kind of thing. And they can say, we are going to lift an offering for Trump. We are going to write a check for $1 million to support his campaign. And that's great. They can openly support him because of the stance he took on Kavanaugh, that kind of thing. So they can overtly influence now. The reason I say that they're not going to overturn Roe versus Wade is because they don't have to. What they're going to do, the states are already preparing. When Kavanaugh was appointed, the states started preparing challenges to segments of that law. For example, to require abortion clinics to have the same facilities as does a hospital, to require abortion clinics to be staffed in certain ways. As a matter of fact, the abortion clinics staffing and anti-equipment presence exceeds that of some those minute clinics. What is it?
Doctor boxes.
The clinics that
Urgent care.
urgent care. It exceeds some urgent care facilities. So what they're doing, they're not actually overturning it, but they're making it too expensive. Yeah. So Roe versus Wade is still on the book, but it cannot. No one can do the abortion because there's no way to do it legally. You see what I'm talking about? So that's one of the ways they're going to do it. And the church has always wanted to be in control of the government in an overt way. And the church is anti-democracy. The church does not believe in the will of the majority or the will of the people. The church doesn't believe, she might tell you to get up. The church, I'm just messing with you. No. The church does not believe in voting.
In what?
Voting. The church is a dictatorship. If you look at Catholicism, everything in Catholicism is decided by one person. And that one person, not only does that one person supersede the will of those who are attached to that particular Christian denomination, but what that person says also appears to supersede the laws of the land. Because the priests who raped those kids are still at large. And because Ronald Reagan granted sovereignty to the Vatican by virtue of exchanging diplomats, the ones who go to the Vatican cannot be extradited without the permission of the Pope. So that's dictatorship. That's totalitarian. That stuff.
Now, just because we did it doesn't mean that every country, of course I know there are Catholic countries all over the world, but just because the United States has that relationship, another country which doesn't have that relationship can in fact request.
And that's it. That's where it stops.
That a priest be extradited.
Extradited, and that's where it stops. Request.
Okay.
Because beyond the request, how are you going to get the priest? You're going to fight your way into the Vatican.
Have to go Swiss guards standing at the door.
You see what I'm saying? So, and even with them standing there, if they were not, you're still not going to do it, because it's going to instigate warlike attitude around the world. So, when we look at the denominations that grew out of the Catholic Church, they're in the same way. And please stay with me for a moment, because I'm going somewhere with this. Even the churches that we grew up in, even though they appeared not to be dictatorial, they were. And when it comes to females just don't count, period. There's no input from nuns in the Catholic Church. The only input that denominational churches want from females is to raise money and to stand with the pastor when he's on attack. That's it. The reason that this is in place, and the reason women are treated the way they are, is because there's an old English law, and that law that was included in the laws of this land at the inception of this nation. That law said that if a woman claimed to be raped or sexually assaulted, she had to produce credible evidence. If a man said that he was robbed or assaulted, the investigation would take place because by virtue of him saying it, it was credible. So now think in these terms. Think about the English law that says a woman having been raped or sexually assaulted must produce credible evidence. There was no such thing as a rape kit at that time. You see where I'm coming from? Mm-hmm. So in essence, what was being said is that it is legal to rape a woman. That's the bottom line of what's, because if you can't produce credible evidence, and I know you can't, then what's being said here?
The credible evidence was usually a man corroborating.
And who, if the man is there, it's just like Mount Judge. Mm-hmm. You see? So that's not going to happen. we are, I don't think that we are on the verge of a state like the state that was developed or brought into fruition by Hitler. I don't think that's it at all. I don't think it's Nazi rule. I believe that we are on the verge of a Christian dictatorship. Before World War II, there were nations known as the Papal nations: Hungary, Poland, Romania, pretty much all of Eastern Europe. And after World War II, the control of the Vatican, the control of the Pope over these nations ended. I believe that we're on the verge of that. Why? Because if Kavanaugh did not have an evangelical attitude, there would not have been such a fight to put him on the court. He grew up Catholic. If you look at the court, most of them, if not all, are Catholic. It is my contention that we are living Revelations 13, verse 1, and verses 11 and 12. And it is also my contention that the reason we are living verses 1, 11, and 12 is because of our desire to bring balance, to bring sense of unicity between male and female, to be one with male, for male and female to be one. It also means that we are one with our Creator. I believe that this is the effort that's taking place now, because you cannot deal with the source of imbalance if you don't know what it is. The source of imbalance is not the drug dealer or the murderer who has no connection to the church. The drug dealer and the murderer are a symptom of the church. And to further, to give you an example of that is, if you go into, especially the intercity, you got a church on every corner and nothing changes. Why? Because they're not there to change anything. They're there to maintain. Even though the people in those buildings believe they are there to change things. They truly believe that. And those in the pulpit, some of them truly believe that. They are so caught up on the material world until they have lost their sense of sobriety, intellectual or cognitive sobriety, when it comes to really seeing that you're not changing anything, they're becoming worse. So if things are becoming worse, then what kind of effect is your presence having on them? This is the thing I believe with this. I'm trying to do my best to articulate what I'm seeing. The very presence of the church creates chaos and evilness and darkness. The very presence of it. And the reason I say that is, so don't turn me off right now, just listen to the rest of it before you turn me off. The reason I say that is because if Catholicism is chaotic, and it is, if Catholicism does nothing to punish, or at least, at the very least, embrace those who have been raped by priests, if it does nothing to rectify this, then it is actually complicit in it and a perpetuator of it. That being said, everything that grows from the root of the Catholic Church has the same energy. So it doesn't matter what you say your purpose is, it is the energy of the organization that guides you. It's the energy that's given off that determines what happens in your environment. It's like taking a pecan and calling that pecan a banana. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's not a banana. So you can call it Baptist, Methodist, whatever you want to call it. It's still Catholicism, because that's where it came from. Well, that's not true, because we're not Catholics, we're Baptists. Okay. Barbara has a son. Is your son named Barbara? No. Your daughter named Barbara? No. Or has sons, I should say. And neither one of her children are named Barbara, right? Mm-hmm. But they're still your children. And they still have your energy. They still have portions of your personality, right? The basic foundational things that they have comes from you and John. Comes from home. So regardless of what they say, their foundation is Barbara and John. So if we take that narrative and look at Catholicism, it doesn't matter what you call it, the foundational principles are still the same. And which means that regardless of how the children fight or kick against the prick or not want to be reflective of their source, which is in this case the parents, they are still expressive of those foundational things. They can't get away from it, because that's the root of their existence. And this is the same thing with these denominational churches. So that is one of the reasons that things are the way they are, in spite of the fact that all of these churches are in all of these neighborhoods. And when it gets to a place where they are able to afford it, all the people in the church move out of the neighborhood, and nothing is there but the building. They drive in on Sundays. And things continue to get worse. This is what I am observing. This is what I'm observing in relationship to what's happening at this very moment. The nation is getting worse because the source of its existence is beginning to exert its authority over it. And the authority that's being exerted over this nation is the authority of the evangelical/Catholic Church. It is the church that put Trump in office. So that in itself is saying that it exerts its authority. Now, this is the other thing. Most people miss this. This country is, the laws of this country are made by the minority, not the majority. If you look at the red states, you will find that there are more red states than there are blue states. Each one of the red states has 2 senators. And I think it's what, 20, no, 30-something red states. But let's just say 30 for a number, okay? That's 60 senators out of 100. You see where I'm coming from? That's 60 out of 100. Now those red states has the lowest population. So the most populated states are those deemed to be blue states. So you see where I'm coming from? So it's the minority who's making the laws. There is no reason, no logical reason based upon democracy or democratic principles that someone from Arkansas should be leading the Senate, because it's one of the poorest states and one of the least populated states. Think about it. Or is it Kentucky, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
McConnell, Kentucky. There's no reason for that. But you see where I'm coming from? Now, the majority of the people in this country are not Christians. But Christians control the country. So we are at a place where we are experiencing the beast of the sea. It not only exerted its authority over the beast of the earth, which is government, it is simply not overtly telling the government what to do, but at the same time, not only is it telling the government what to do, but it is making sure that the government does it. These principles of the beast are being carried out by the government, because the church has always wanted to exert its authority over the government because it owns it. If you look into the archives, you will find that during the time that Abraham Lincoln was an attorney in Illinois, he discovered that the Catholics had a plan to populate the major states in this country and to eventually make it a papal state. Lincoln went to court to challenge the Catholics who were in Canada and buying property in this country and setting Catholics in this country in order to make that happen. When Lincoln went to court to challenge those things, he won. And the Catholics, more specifically the Jesuits, told him that he would pay for it. When Lincoln was assassinated, Booth went to a Jesuit bishop's house right after the assassination to get passed out because he broke his leg when he leapt from the balcony. So all of these connections now beginning to make sense to me. If you don't go back to the beginning, you won't understand where you are presently. That is not only true with the spiritual, it is also true with the natural. If we don't know where we came from, we don't know where we are. And I don't mean in terms of geographical location as much as I mean conceptually. We don't know where we are, neither do we know how we got to where we are. There are those who are listening, either YouTube or now, it doesn't matter, who believe that, or think probably, that I am sitting here dealing with history as opposed to the spiritual. It is my firm belief that it is impossible to separate the history from the spiritual because they are one and the same. There's no difference in the two. Okay? If we are to bring balance, then the things that we have experienced in the past few weeks must continue to occur. I have been saying that Kavanaugh will not be approved from day one, from the time he was nominated. And everything in me has been, or with everything in me, I have been pushing in that direction. So you say you didn't change anything because he's virtually approved. That doesn't say anything to me other than it's the will of the Creator for a greater reason.
That's where it's going.
Now, don't get me wrong. I've had my moments to the extent that I don't listen to it or watch it anymore. I may read something, intermittent, but I don't. Because I've had my moments with the politics of it or the natural sense of it becoming a source of frustration. And at times attempting to overshadow what I know to be true spiritual. And what I mean by overshadowing it, making a strong attempt to put my soul to sleep again. If my soul goes to sleep, then I see no hope, because I only see what's in front of me. My soul being awakened, I can see beyond what's in front of me simply by closing my eyes.
And I see it this way. Whatever we see in the physical, just because it seems to be occurring, we have to look beyond that into the spiritual, because that's where the truth lies. And so, well, they're going to take a vote. I guess he's confirmed now in the physical. But there's so much stuff in the spiritual that's going on as a result of all of this that occurred in people's faces, that see in the spiritual, he still hasn't been, he's not confirmed to me, regardless of what the physical says. And so when I accept that fact in the spiritual, that he's not necessarily confirmed, that keeps the door open for light and for whatever else. And so I'm not disheartened because of that.
It's, I believe what's happening on a more personal level or in a more finite place is that your poor choice of words, optimism, your what you see spiritually and is holding on to that has that keeps your soul from even attempting to go to sleep. That brings no frustration because you see it clearly. Is an example of the feminine energy doing what it's supposed to do. And that is, again, lack of a better word, leadership and birthing. And my struggle with this is no different than what John said to Jesus. You must increase as I decrease. So the masculine energy has to decrease in order for the feminine energy to increase. You understand what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So that, I see that in what we are talking about here and seeing. And I have no qualms with that at all. Because the authority, the spiritual authority, the natural authority, that masculine energy has risen to, or exalted itself to, has been always to dominate the feminine. So if that being the case, then there has to be a decrease in order for the feminine to be seen or to do what it's supposed to do. And I see that being manifested between the two of us in relationship to what we are looking at in this Supreme Court thing.
And I see it being manifested when I think of all of the energy that's just been exposed to the masses, particularly women, with all of this, with this process. They are a force to be reckoned with. And at some point in time, they will be reckoned with. Whether it be through politics, whatever the mechanism, there have been so many eyes open because of this. And not only just women, the masculine energy, but the force that are, this feminine energy is about to explode.
And that's
I don't mean it negatively.
right. That's my point exactly. What I interpret or define that idea of explosion as bursting out of the womb. You know, the umbilical sac or being
Expelling
is
itself from the
ruptured.
tight space.
Yes. It's not coincidental to me that when one of our four friends wrote a letter to the Senate committee, Judicial Committee, and to the White House, saying that he and a minimum of 7 other people can corroborate what she was saying. Because because he was told blah, 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 2016, etc. I don't think the numbers, like he said, at least a minimum of 7 more. He would make 8, which is new beginning. So I don't think that's coincidental at all. I believe that the signs of the times are all around us. Sometimes it appears as though they are minute, or that they are coincidental events, but there are no coincidences, and nothing is minute. Everything speaks to something greater. Is that we have not been sensitive enough to experience the changes that are before us. And Revelation is speaking to me, and the me that it's speaking to is inclusive of humanity. Now, I'm sensitive to hearing it, to experiencing it, but it doesn't mean it's not resonant. So, I do not believe that, as I said at the onset, that this is a move like Hitler made to Nazi thing. I don't believe that. Even though that the pattern is there, I believe that it is a move for Christianity to take authority in this nation. And it will take authority two ways: the Electoral College and the Supreme Court. Everything the church carries to the courts are going to ratify. And during the course of national elections, there is always the possibility of the church winning with electoral votes, even though the majority of the people are not in favor of it. And it is not so difficult to eliminate, or at the very least minimize, an uprising or protest. One of the reasons that I don't particularly care about marching, I will observe them, but as far as participating, I really don't care that much, because marches don't change anything. The government says, let them demonstrate, let them protest, but we're going to do what we're doing anyway. It's out of the system, and they think they've done something, then they go back home and do nothing. That has been the case. That has been the case consistently. And the only reason, well, before I go to that, the idea of a Christian nation speaks to a white nation, a slave nation. And I'll speak to the slave thing in a moment, economic slavery. One of the reasons males have been able to dominate, especially nationally, is because females have been birthing their power. African females have stayed out of the fray for the most part. Even in terms of voting, they just stayed out of the fray. White females have been voting nationally to keep Republican / racist folk in office. 54% of white females, not females, they tell you on TV females, 54% of white females voted for Trump. And was it 30 or 47% of black females voted for him? Females have been birthing the power that you've been seeing manifest. Even though they were voting against their self-interest, they were empowering men to continue to dominate.
Well, especially evangelical women, because according to everything they know, a woman should not be president.
And see, the other part of that is not just evangelical women, it's also charismatic women.
Yeah. Well, yeah, all of them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also Black Baptist women.
Mm-hmm.
There are any number of African females who does not believe a woman should be president. And keep in mind that the African church chose Hillary over Obama.
Yeah.
You see where I'm coming from?
Mm-hmm.
So we are experiencing something, and the something that we are experiencing is a resurgence of the feminine. That resurgence of the feminine cannot overcome what Revelation is talking about in terms of the beast received his power from the church. The government received his power from the church. Cannot be overcome until the souls of African women is awakened. When the souls of African women is awakened, you get results like you got in Alabama with Doe Jones. That is a manifestation of an awakening of the African soul, female soul, feminine soul. The way slavery is perpetuated in the nation is through economics now. The economic advantages have always been given to white people. Doesn't matter how much education you have. If you got through, you squeaked through. And you're not representative of the quote-unquote race. In 1934, there was, the FHA was done in 34. Prior to the FHA, there was something called the HO, Homeowners Loan Association, something like that, established by Roosevelt. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but it made it easier for people to purchase a home or to keep it, because people are losing their homes. White people were losing their homes during the Depression. Amortization for home loans and lengthening the time for home loans and decreasing the payments came as a result of that. And we can talk about that some other time. But one of the things that was extremely prevalent in every one of the policies that established these organizations was that colors could not take advantage of it. If one African family moved into a neighborhood, the whole neighborhood was deemed to be devalued, and they would not lend for any more homes in that area. Where redlining came from is the government. They would, all the white neighborhoods, they would paint them green, and all the African neighborhood, even if only one family was in it, they painted them red on the map. That was the color on the map, red. So you could not get a loan in those red neighborhoods. That's where redlining came from. One of the basic foundational policies of the FHA was that people of color could not get a loan from the FHA, and that local appraisals would be used, and their direction was to make sure that no coloreds or foreigners lived in the neighborhood. And when African males sought jobs, the labor unions would not let them in. And that was purposely so, because they could not reap the benefits of labor unions. One man might, during that period, be making $2 an hour, but the black man making 75 cents. So that's economic slavery. There were things put into place to keep, there were deals made with businesses and government to keep African from making the same amount of money as white people. So what happened with that is the white person's kids will have foundation to build on because they were able to save money. Black families' kids couldn't, because their family didn't make enough to live on, let alone save. So with that taking place, we see now it's spiritually genetic, that the difficulty in black folks saving money. It's a struggle, and the struggle was put there purposely. So that's this economic slavery that I'm talking about, and the church perpetuated that. There were, in 1920, there were let me back up a moment. African people, after slavery, could work on sharecroppers' farms, and they always lost, right? They always came up behind. But what most people don't know is that some of them who went to quote unquote town on their day off were arrested for vagrancy or for loitering under the black codes. And they couldn't pay the fines because they had no money. But they were not being arrested for that reason. They were being sold to mining companies like Bethlehem Steel. They would sell them for labor, and they didn't get paid. So you see where I'm coming from? So that's even putting you deeper into economic slavery. So my point is this: slavery has never ended, and we say it, but we don't point to the things that are indicators that it has not ended.
Well, yeah, the chain gangs of 20s and 30s and 40s, basically slavery.
And I'm saying to this day, they don't need the chain gang anymore. They only need to redline neighborhoods, remove grocery stores, remove the jobs.
Well, yeah.
So now there is a perpetuation of poverty,
Mm-hmm.
which is in itself is actually slavery, but we call it poverty.
Yeah.
So
Including all this home loan stuff where they were charging black people more, or charging them higher interest rates and all that.
that started after, in 34 when the FHA was instituted. If black folk got a loan, it was at a higher rate than was the loans for white people. And the idea of birth control. The birth control on plantations, when the numbers of Africans grew, they would sell them off to distant plantations. And that's how they controlled the numbers on the plantation. And they would sell mostly males. Well, the way slavery exists now to control the population, I'll put you in jail at 15, 19. Now you're in jail. And because you were in jail, you're not able to produce anything. So you get out of jail and there's no job, you go back to jail. You stay in jail until you're like 50, 55, off and on, in and out of jail. When you get out, you're less likely to produce a child. So birth control has been done by keeping the male seed out of the population until it reaches an age where it is less likely to produce children. So you say, but girls are still having babies. Yeah, they are. But that male can't take care of his child because he doesn't have a job. So that's the slavery of which I speak. These are the indicators. One of the other things, I'm gonna say this and then I'm gonna move on. I believe that marijuana is being legalized for two reasons. One is that it's being financed by the super rich behind the scenes. These capital equity, what is it? The companies are doing it behind the scenes.
It's huge, a hedge fund.
Yes, hedge funds are doing it behind the scenes. However, the end result is not just money. The end result is damage to the brain. There was a recent study done, and that study showed that marijuana is more damaging to the brain than alcohol. That study said that when teenagers smoke marijuana, the brain is damaged. The memory loss that occurs, even if they quit smoking and never smoke again, they never regain that memory loss. However, if those same teenagers were drinking alcohol and stopped drinking it, they can recover the memory loss. So, the church has a responsibility, if it is to be what it say it is, to see not only what I'm talking about, but to do something about it. And the something to do about it is to act on it. It is our responsibility, based on the scriptures, to make sure that the whole of humanity is cared for. When in the 91st Psalm, that first verse talks about abiding under the shadow of the Almighty. And in the 23rd Psalm, the 6th verse talks about the valley of the shadow of death. Could I walk through the valley of the shadow of death? I fear. That's the 6th verse of the 23rd Psalm. The church has a responsibility to look at those words to find out what it means. We simply talked about a shadow of the Almighty as being a shadow like our shadow. But if that is the case, then that makes the one you created a man, a human, God, a human. You see where I'm coming from? Mm-hmm. So it cannot be that kind of a shadow. So what kind of shadow is it? Well, those two words are different, not just in connotation, but in meaning, because they are two different words totally. The one in 23rd Psalm 6th verse talks about to die a violent death, or to be in the presence of a violent death. That's what it speaks to. So that is totally different than abiding under the shadow of the Almighty, which means being protected. That word shadow is talking about being protected, being cared for by the Almighty, by Yahweh. So the church has a responsibility to make those distinctions. And if we make those distinctions and help people to understand that the secret place that you ought to dwell in is that place deep inside of you. The secret place is your soul. It's the source of all your spiritual awareness. It is the place where um, cognitive spirituality emanates. It's like a warehouse that the Creator built in us for the storage of everything we were created with. And when that warehouse door swings open, then when you see something in the scriptures that doesn't quite make sense, because your soul is awakened, it causes you to question it, and it leads you to the truth of what's being said. Are you with me?
Yeah. Pastor,
Uh-huh.
but I thought you said that the church need to do what it's supposed to do. You
That's
saying?
what I'm talking about.
But my thing is, I thought the church religion was exploding or is dead.
I say that the church should do what it's supposed to,
Should, okay,
what it purports to be.
right.
If the church does what it purports to be, I'm talking about what it would do.
Okay.
I'm very clear, I hope, on the understanding that it doesn't do what it's supposed to.
Okay.
If it were, then it would help us to understand that as I said, the secret place is the soul. And out of that secret place comes all of the characteristics with which we were fearfully and wonderfully made or molded. We were meticulously created. It talks about being created from the dust of the earth. You know, it indicates hands involved in the creation, doesn't it? Or it intimates that hands were used in the creation, I should say. So that means that we were created not only by, but with the authority of the one who created us. And if we look at that carefully, we will see in that second chapter of Genesis, it says, and the Lord God, Yahweh, Jehovah, or Adonai, because Almighty in Psalm 91 talks about the Adonai. If it's talking about this, then that means we have the characteristics of Elohim and Yahweh. The characteristics of Elohim can be seen in the characteristics of Adam. All of what we have spoken of today in relationship to the oneness of the church and state can be overcome when we understand what I'm about to talk about. Yahweh is not a separate entity. Yahweh is a characteristic of insult. It is, for understanding purposes, a personality trait of insult. As long as we embrace that we are created in the image of Elohim and that we are Elohim and we stop there, we will never be able to truly do what Jesus did. Yeshua means Yahweh who delivers. Yeshua, Yahweh who delivers. It has no indication in it of being Elohim. It was not necessary because at that juncture, Jesus knew that he was Elohim. The priest knew also, because when they challenged him in John 10, he said, is it not written in your law that I say that you're God, you're Elohim? And they did not stone him, they just left him alone. Okay? I believe the reason that I am being shown this at this moment is because deliverance is at hand. Jesus said that we're supposed to be able to do what he did, but not only that, but greater things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every time Jesus thought of the label that was put on him, i.e. his name, he was saying, if he say, I am Jesus, I am Yeshua, right? He was saying, I am Yahweh, the one who delivers. Are you following me?
Mm-hmm.
So until we adopt that characteristic, that trait, knowing that we are also Yahweh who delivers, the deliverance can't take place. Because the trait of Elohim is not deliverance. The trait of Elohim is to create, is to bring things into existence. The trait of Elohim is to take the seed of a principle and impregnate the feminine with that principle, because it's the feminine that has the power to bring that principle to fruition by virtue of nurturing it. So that is the oneness of it. I speak that way because you can grasp it if I speak in those earthly terms as though there is a space or a time period between the concept of the seed or the principle of the seed and the birth of the concept. But it isn't. There is no space between the two because there is no space between male and female. And when Jesus was talking about, and the two shall become one, he was speaking of the nature of Adam becoming what it was in the beginning. So when I speak concerning being expressive of Yahweh, then I am also being expressive of Elohim, because if Yahweh and Elohim brought the entity Adam into being, then the traits of both are in that entity. And up to this point, I have only seen or have been only shown the principle that involves our embracing Elohim, or the concept of Elohim, because that's who not only created us, because that's who we are. However, I see now that there's more to the story than embracing the principles and the womb that brings it to fruition. there has to be a purpose. For the principle, if there is no purpose for the principle, when the principle is birthed, it will die. Because when you don't have a use for a thing, you have a tendency to cast it aside. If we understand the purpose for the principle and the nurturing or birth of that principle, it is at that point that we are able to massage, to nurture, to bring creative power to it, to give life to it, so that the soul can experience a deeper awakening. And it is my belief that we find the purpose of these principles in Yahweh. And when Ein Sof, or the one with the unspeakable name, allowed this physical body to be enlivened by someone who was called Yeshua, Yahweh delivers. It knew what it was doing, and it also knew that generations would have to come into being before there could be a realization of the purpose of this body being called Yahweh. The purpose of the principle is for deliverance, because Yahweh is the deliverer, not Elohim.
And when you say deliverance from?
Deliverance from a state of being that is reflected in our unconscious nature. Put simply, awaken our soul from the sleep that it has been in since Adam sought to be separate from a womb.
So it's almost freeing us from enslavement from a spiritual perspective.
Yes. You can't be freed from slavery from a natural perspective until you are spiritual. Because first came the spiritual, then the natural. The spiritual takes precedence over the natural. So when we say as above, so is below, the spiritual freedom of which Barbara speaks has to be manifested in this world that we call below. However, it can and will not be done if we continue to discard the purpose for being Elohim, the purpose for inhabiting these bodies. When we recognize and embrace the concept of Yeshua, or Yeshua, however you want to pronounce it, it is then that we become that entity that was created in the beginning, because it was the Lord God who created Adam, who built Adam. And when we embrace being Yahweh, we embrace the purpose of Elohim being Yahweh. The purpose is to deliver or to awaken. It is at that point that we can begin to see with a clearer vision the unripened part of the tree beginning to ripen itself. We are the essence of everything that Jesus represented in terms of manifestation, in terms of his reality that he lived in. Jesus said, I want to gather those who would rule as God, as Elohim. I want to gather them to me, like a chick gathers her brood under her wings, but they won't hear me. Just like the pattern in the first chapter of Genesis was laid, or the architectural drawing for male and female was there, or male, female, and it was brought into fruition in chapter 2. The pattern for deliverance by Yahweh was drawn in the life of Jesus. And it is up to us to take that architectural drawing or that pattern and breathe life into it so it can become what it was supposed to be, and the result of it will be a place, a pleasurable place for the whole of humanity. And the pleasurable place for the whole of humanity will be in the earth realm, because there would have been a ripening of earth consciousness. The pattern that Jesus laid not only included deliverance or awakening of the soul, but the results of that also. When the soul was awakened, it was able to move between the spiritual and the natural with ease. I asked the question I've been wondering for quite some time. Why is it, or how is it, maybe a better question, that Jesus could sit at a table and eat, or go to the beach where the Peter and the others were, and eat? How could he eat if it was a spirit? When transition takes place, and we are in the image of that Jesus was in, we are able to live in both worlds, which means that consumption of food is not an impossibility, but is not a necessity. The great wonders that will be shown by the beasts of the earth is a type of purity that it has brought into fruition from its spirit, its soul, its mind, I should say, not soul, has brought into fruition from its soul, from its mind, and convinced humanity that this is the way that the Creator wanted things to be when it talks about the fire coming from heaven as a great wonder being performed by the beast. We see that in action right now. The church does not see or refuses to acknowledge the pervasive immorality that permeates not only the government but the church as well. When you look at the immorality of government, I'm not talking about just sexual immorality, I'm talking about it's immoral to starve people. It's immoral to treat people as though they're animals. So when I'm talking about immorality, I'm talking about a plethora of things. When we look at that immorality, we also see the source of this false spirit putting forth a different type of morality. We hear about the priest forgiving sin. So is the reason the Pope doesn't do anything about child rape is because he is convincing people that he has absolved those who did it of their sin, of their entanglements, even though they continue to do it. We see this in action right now, this type of miraculous event. We usually think that miracles are things that we call positive, but that's not so. There is a miracle that is right before our eyes. It is a miraculous thing that so many people who profess to be righteous can look but not see the immoral attitude and actions of the leadership. That's a miracle. That is being shown or being performed or presented by the two beasts.
So the soul is still sleeping. That's what that's indicative of for Christians who can't see beyond what they're told.
Yes.
They've been lulled or hypnotized, or it's like they've been quote unquote taken over in terms of some demonic spirit, for lack of a better
they have used their minds to deceive humanity, because the dragon, the devil, the deceiver has been loosened in the earth for the purpose of deception. When people begin to realize that they are being deceived or duped, they become open to change. And when they become open to change, it is then that those who are seeking truth or traveling this journey of following the pathway of truth and righteousness are able to influence their minds. And what I mean by that is are able to shape the soul and awaken the souls. And the soul will speak to the mind. And the mind begins to see what we have put in quote unquote the macro. And therein lies the change. Not the beginning of it, but the change itself. And that results in the church losing its power. If the beast of the earth receives its power from the beast of the sea, it is not necessary to go after, and I use these earthly terms again so I can explain what I see. It is not necessary to go after the beasts of the earth. But if you go after the beasts of the sea, you don't only diminish the power of the beasts of the earth, you eliminate it. Because it receives its power from the beasts of the sea. Are you with me?
Yes.
So you cannot fight government and expect spiritual change. You cannot fight government and expect people's heart to change or their thoughts to change or their principled direction to change. When you deal with spiritual things, you have to have spiritual arrows in your quiver. And when you engage in this battle, it begins to weaken the beast of the sea, which is religion. And because it is weakened, it can no longer hide the deeds that are being perpetrated by the beast of the earth, which is government. So all of these things are exposed because the beast, the religion, can't fight this spiritual battle and keep things hidden at the same time. It has to use as much energy as it can to preserve itself, which means that the powers of the government are becoming weak also. The focus has to stay on the powers that are emanating from the root of the evilness, unrightness that we see in the earth. This government has always been propped up by the church, or undergirded by the church. The scripture says that everything that can be shaken will be shaken. It also says that judgment begins at what? The household of faith. So it is not surprising, or shouldn't be anyway, that everything is being shaken, including us. This doesn't apply only to religious people who seemingly don't have a clue. Everything that can be shaken. We are being shaken. Everything we thought true, we began to see, it wasn't. We are being shaken. The things that are still in us, that bubble to the surface, shakes us. The things that are happening around us shakes us. It said be shaken, not destroyed. To me, I hold on to the idea that the shaking is like fruit juice. All of the pulp of the juice, if it sits, it floats to the bottom. Which means that all of its value is at the bottom. That's the soul. If you're going to get the value, you have to shake it. But every time you let it sit without movement, everything flows to the bottom again. So we're going back to sleep. So this journey, on this journey, we don't have the luxury of stopping. We have to keep moving as we see things unfold. There's going to come a time when, because of what the Creator is showing, and because of what I am going to say, there will be others who will fall away from this covenant. I'm prepared for that. There will be people who will not even call in anymore. I'm prepared for that. However, I know this. Beyond the shadow of any doubt, the prevailing of righteousness will be experienced by humanity. Because even those who fall away will be a part of the righteousness, because though they fall away, they still receive, because they have opened themselves to this covenant. I'm good with that. The last thing that I want to say to you is this. Out of everything that has been spoken, the greatest is this. Knowing that we are Elohim does not lend itself to deliverance. Knowing that we are Elohim opens us up to understand the purpose for being Elohim, and that purpose is deliverance. Yahweh delivers. So the trait, the principle of Yahweh that enlivens us is what puts us not just in a position, but it enables us to disentangle humanity from the things that blind humanity and enslaves it. Time is of the essence. Use it wisely. The way that we move beyond time is living out of the secret place that we dwell in. Because it is the personality trait of Shara that protects and provides. Amen. See things as they are. But don't see things as they are. This Kavanaugh thing? See it through your eye as Barbara sees it through her, and not your eyes. This is imperative. Therefore, but one what you say to say. So the falling off does not end the journey. The disbelief does not end the journey. It proves that the journey is real. I'm done.
Have a thought.
Hold on 1 second.